So everyone, it's the first webinar of the year. Let's kick this off. I'm Camilla Bullock. I'm the CEO of the Emerging Payments Association Asia and EPAA, like we call us. We are the leading branch organization in the APAC region. We're representing the full value chain of payments, being one unified voice into regulators in the global arena or into domestic regulators. And from all those discussions, we find amazing thought leaders that are here to enhance payments, like, for example, Gleif and Alex Keck, who have enabled this webinar today. And today, we're really going to talk about the intersection between payments, digital identity, and security. And I think everybody that's on the line really knows that payments volumes cross-border is really increasing. And with that, we need to focus more on security, efficiency, transparency, which is all part of those G20 goals for those of you who have been following that project for the last 3 years. The Gleif Foundation and the LEIs will focusing more about what they are and what they're not and what the problem is. And we'll also invite all of you to pop your questions into the chat whenever you feel like, or if you want to be anonymous, you can go to the Q&A and do it anonymously. But I'm going to first to introduce 3 of my panelists who are on the line now, and then I'll send the 4th one, which is Aslina Idris. She's the Senior Director and Head of ESG Office at Paynet in Malaysia. So I hope she's going to join us because she's given a really good perspective from Malaysia and the Southeast Asia. And we have Alex Keck, who is the CEO of the Gleif Foundation. And he's based in Basel in Switzerland. And we have Aline Rahes. I think I'm nailing the pronunciation now. I've been using Google so done that. He is the founder and chief commercial officer at IPID, and he's based in Belgium, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And then we have Dima Postnokov, and he is the head of identity strategy. No, he is the head of identity strategy at AP Plus here in Australia. So I'm going to start off with asking you a question. Maybe you can tell a little bit more about yourself and the organization shortly, not too long. And also, what is the goal 2025 for you? What are you working in for space? And after that, we'll start to unpack a few questions. And again, everybody, just pop your question in, say hello. Maybe we can say to audience, do you want to pop in and say where you are from? That will help our panelists to actually address you in a better way. But Alex, please, do you want to start to do an introduction of yourself and Gleif?
Sure. So I'm Alexandre Kesch. I'm based in Switzerland. I recently joined Gleif as the new CEO after a number of years in banking, many years at Swift with Alain, actually, and also in the blockchain industry. Gleif, I guess we will be talking a lot about it later, so and the LEI, so I won't go into too much detail, as I guess I will be giving an introduction of what Gleif is and what LEI is, but my goal for the coming years is really about demonstrating the value of LEI in other industries than capital market where it is heavily used today, such as payments, supply chain management, trade in general, and ESG activities, related activities. And I will try to convey that message today during this conference.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Aslina did a quick intro from where you're based in Malaysia and working for Paynet. And now we're asking if you want to do a quick introduction of your organization and also what your goal is for 2025. And welcome to the panel.
Yeah, okay. Good day, everyone. So sorry for the slight delay in joining, some technical glitches just now. I represent Payments Network Malaysia Sendirian Berhad. We are actually the national retail payments operator for Malaysia. Malaysia is actually part of a coalition of countries called ASEAN, way down in Southeast Asia. We are made up of 11 countries. So as a national payments operator, we operate over 14 types of products. including fast payment systems, QR, on an interoperable basis. We also run the national card rail. On top of that, we run the national debit card, as well as e-commerce payments as the main types of payments. So for 2025, what our priorities would be is actually to look at how do we consolidate our bilateral linkages, because all this while we have among the most number of bilateral linkages with other ASEAN nations in the fast payment space, particularly in QR. We do have some cards and ATM connectivity, but that's not that many. For this year, we're looking at consolidating and making sure that things are more rationalized, streamlined, and therefore having some kind of common identifier would be something that is relevant, that payment switches at this side of the world want to look into. So happy to join this particular talk. Yeah.
And that's the topic, common identifiers. You're in the right webinar. Thank you very much for that. From one payments infrastructure to another, Dima, do you want to speak a little bit about your role and what AP Plus is?
So just briefly, my background is consumer identity in banking and open banking type of architectures. I do a lot of work in the standard bodies like OpenID Foundation on a lot of standards that support the identity industry. I work for Australian Payments Plus. Australian Payments Plus is the national payment rails operator. So we run national networks in a similar way. I specifically focus on Connect ID, which is our identity verification network. We've been live for about a year now, year and a half. And one of the goals for this year is dealing with business identity. So we're trying to evolve with just from purely consumer identity into business identity and authorized representatives, which is a perfect segue to this webinar.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dima. I do proud ourselves on that we actually always get fantastic speakers on our webinar, so thank you. Then Aline, Rajesh, do you want to speak a little bit about yourself and IPID?
Yes, and again, very, very proud and happy to joining this webinar. My name is Anahas. I'm the co-founder and chief commercial officer of a company called IPID, which stands for International Payment Identity. This is actually a Singapore-based fintech that we created about 3 years ago. My background is essentially about the financial industry. Like Alex mentioned already, we spent together a certain number of years at Swift. Actually, I've been at Swift for 31 years, and I've been member of its executive committee for 14 years. When it comes to 2025, we founded IPID about 3 years ago. Actually, we celebrate our 3rd year as we speak this month. And really the purpose of this time for this year is really about expanding, it's getting even more global, and especially in the context of new regulatory evolutions that we might talk about during this webinar, things like COP, confirmation of Payee in the UK, but also in Australia pretty soon, VOP, verification of Payee when it comes to Europe. We are very much geared towards actually positioning your company as a provider of data in this context, in these developments as well. It's actually quite important when it comes to Europe because it's actually a very strict deadline that's been imposed by the European Commission, which is in October this year, whereby every single payments euro-denominated in Europe will have to be pre-validated. But I'm sure we'll come back to that actually during this webinar.
It's funny because it's one thing that I often question myself. How can we have sent all those payments in all those years without knowing where it's actually going? I think we're going to look back in a couple of years, we're going to say like, how could we have done that? It sounds crazy, doesn't it? Especially when it's those big amounts. But I think maybe staying a little bit with you, 32 years in Swift, that's quite amazing. I'm going to turn to you and say, what is the problem? What is the problem that we're solving? Why do we want to enter those new regulations?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, perhaps I think with 31 years at Swift, right, I've seen a lot of evolution in the global payments industry, whether it's actually international payments or domestic payments. It's fair to say also there's been actually a lot of positive development as well, right? I mean, I remember my early days, early 90s. It sounds like so long ago, but you know, an international payments was taking anywhere between 5 to 7 days to get into reaching the final recipients. What you see nowadays when it comes to domestic payments, actually, it's mostly real time, like in Australia, but in as many as other 90 countries have actually domestic real-time payment rails. And when it comes to international payments, it's fair to say also that in many corridors, payments corridors, we're getting close to real time, right? We're talking about an hour, 2 hours. Actually, if you look at SWIFT, actually, most of the payments of SWIFT today are reaching the final recipients in a couple of hours maximum, right? Still, actually, there's many other problems that still need to be solved, right? And I would say one, I see on the top of my head, actually, 3 major ones. One is typically, there's still actually at a cross-border level, a lot of rejects, payments that are being rejected for many reasons, like eventually the name of the final recipient is not correctly spelled, the account number eventually is wrong, there's a digit in the account number that is not correct. All of that is actually generating a lot of operating costs. We estimate that at a cross-border level, anywhere between 5 to 10%, depending on the corridor, anywhere between 5 to 10% of payments are being rejected. And these are generating at the industry, global industry level, I would actually estimate this at billions of dollars of operating costs that are literally wasted, right? So there's a lot of things to be done, like investigation, repairs, resend, all of that, creating cost, frustration at the level of client as well, and of course also create some reputation problems. So we estimate that, and we've seen some numbers that in some countries a payment being rejected actually is clearly questioning for the client actually the need to payment to using the same bank again for making the payment. So it is actually an issue of retaining the client in this context as well. The second major problem, and that is really rising very fast, is fraud. What we have observed is that as the payment rails are becoming a lot more efficient, i.e. actually the payments is actually moving, the money is moving a lot faster than before, there is actually, in parallel to this, actually a very fast growth of fraud at cross-border level, but also still at the domestic level. And that is really becoming a major issue for industry. It's an issue of credibility, of trust, of cost as well, because there are also legislation that are moving ahead and that really will impose to any PSPs, banks, non-banks, actually to taking the cost of those frauds. That becomes therefore also an issue for the PSPs. And what we see, obviously, in this context, I mentioned some new regulation, but it is becoming so much important that regulators are now moving ahead as well. I've mentioned a couple of them, like COP in the UK or VOP in Europe, but we see actually many countries moving in the same direction. So typically, this is another big problem. Fraud is a big problem. And then somewhere overarching the other two, right, is a matter of customer experience, right? I mean, if you're not actually comfortable with the performance of your PSP as a payment provider, or actually you're not comfortable with the context of fraud as well, you're not really tempted anymore to using all the rails that are being actually offered to the clients, right? So working on fraud, working on fraud prevention, working on efficiency for payments ultimately should lead to improving the client's experience as well. And that remains a problem. We see also some numbers at global levels whereby clearly the easiness to making payments is a major driving factor for the client to using a given PSP against another one. So clearly, customer experience is at the center of many decision makings of clients. So these are the 3 problems that I see still today.
Fantastic, thank you. And some of them you can quote really well, but the dollar value in are really hard to say what the cost is actually. So
it's clear that when it comes to fraud, I mean, nobody really wants to talk about it. Actually, nobody's claiming openly and publicly that they've been actually they've had to face a fraudulent case. But yes, we estimate that we're talking about billions and billions every year that are now actually involved into those fraud cases.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. So Alex, before we go further, I think we really need to clarify what is an LEI. Do you want to give us a bit of spiel? I think you're best placed for that.
Sure. So an LEI is a legal entity identifier, as it's spelled out, and it aims at solving everything that we've just mentioned, is to understand who you're doing business with in a way that is unambiguous and cannot be substituted for either another company or misunderstood by parties involved into a transaction. So the LEI was first created for the capital market after the 2008 financial crisis. It's a regulatory creation in the sense that the Financial Stability Board has created the Global LEI Foundation to create a system, a decentralized system, where companies around the world, be it financial institutions, but also corporates acting at the time in the capital market, would identify themselves, would get a passport that is standardized, that everybody can understand globally and at cross-border level. So quite the same way that I can't travel around with my Belgium ID card or my Swiss permit. If I go to Asia, I need to show my passport because it's the recognized identification of an individual cross-border. The LEI is the recognized identity of a corporate globally. The LEI system, the global LEI system, is still created by regulators, but still overseen by regulators, 70 regulators around the world. And these regulators have either promoted the use of the LEI through mandates or through recommendations or requirements. Just a few examples of where it's used. It's heavily used in the OTC derivative transaction space, where parties to an OTC derivative transaction needs to be identified with an LEI in many countries, in most countries, and reporting around those transactions needs to be done using the LEI. It's used, for example, in Malaysia as the identifier for foreign exchange reporting. It's used in Thailand. I'm talking about Asia Pacific because the audience is mostly from Asia Pacific. In Thailand and South Korea, it's used as an entry point into the stock market, for example. So you need to have an LEI as a foreign company to invest in the market, and more used in the cross-border and domestic payment space. So India is a good example of that. Every payment over $5 million needs to be qualified with LEIs, meaning that the counterparties involved needs to be identified with an LEIs. So why now is LEI going into the payment space? Because G20, which is the creator of the GLIFE system through the Financial Stability Board, identified all those challenges that Alain has shared, and believe that the LEI can contribute to solving most of them, in the sense that if you are able to identify who is paying who, with a clear identifier that is understood from every country, with a clear set of reference data that is used by every payment providers in the world, you avoid confusion about who you're paying and therefore rejects. You limit the risk of fraud because you have a clear identification of the company you're paying. And if someone is trying to substitute itself in the process by using through an invoice fraud, for example, you can more easily detect that type of fraud. And of course, it enables that name to account matching that is very important if you want to avoid those challenges of, okay, I clearly know this is IBM and not in, and this is the account of IBM that I need to pay, and not someone who is also called IBM but is not International Business Machine, but I don't know what, and should not be paid actually. So that's in a nutshell what LEI is. It's a passport for companies to do many different things, and in the cross-border payment space, it's about transparency. It's about certainty of identification of companies when with regards to payer and payee in a domestic and cross-border payment.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. I have one follow-up question, and I sometimes think this is one of the most powerful questions, and that is, what is it not? Just to clarify for the audience, like, that is great, this is what it is, but what is it not?
So it's certainly not in the payment space, it will not necessarily identify the bank involved in the payments, for example, because banks obviously have branches which are attached to a legal entity, and you need sometimes more precision on where a payment needs to go in terms of banking. But it would not necessarily be used for individuals, for example. So that's for sure. So it's really focusing on entities, legal entities, for many different purposes. It's ideal for every single use case where you need to know who you're dealing with, really. In terms of what is not, as I mentioned, it is not used for routing payments, for example. That would be rather the BIC or a local scheme that would be used to do that, because it requires more granularity with regards to the entity itself.
Yeah, I think that BIC is quite an important one on this webinar, that it's actually not replacing BICs, it's complementary. Good,
Absolutely.
thank you for that. I'm going to move on to Eslina. We've heard about the problem and we've heard about the solution. But I find often it gets mixed up when we're talking globally about solutions, where they are fitting in and where they came from first. And I find often like a little bit, yeah, it's good to hear from you, Malaysia, different from Europe. Does the problem resonate with you, and does the solution resonate with you? And if not, why not?
Okay, so I think it's a yes and a no, if you ask me. Because the thing is, domestically, we do instant payments by way of, if it is a company or a business, through what you call the company number, because you do have a registry for companies, so they do have a unique company number that would identify the name does match, the identity of the person that we want to transfer the money to. So if it's a company, it's a company number. If it is a business, it's called a business registration number, or BRN. But that is insofar as in-country is concerned, right? So if you want to do cross-border, this is where I do see value in having an LAI kind of like framework, where when you want to transfer across to, say, from Malaysia to Thailand, for instance, right? From one company in Malaysia to another company in Thailand, how do you validate that that particular company is actually the company that you really do actually want to transfer to? So this is where having some kind of universal adoption of some kind of common identifier is very helpful. But then there's also this other aspect which makes it a little bit more challenging, and I think we did discuss this kind of like offline. What it can't cater for is actually the informality of how businesses are organized in Southeast Asia, because in this part of the world, there's a lot of these informal, unregistered businesses. So that is what it cannot cater for, because these are businesses that exist by registering only an individual, right? And for banks locally in country, right now there's actually some kind of allowance to allow personal payments to also be defaulted as business payments. And there's actually a kind of like a hybrid, some sort of routing that we do in country, right? So if this were to be exported in other parts of Southeast Asia, where there's also informally set up businesses, then that's where the limitation of LAI will kick in, and that becomes a common problem right across the ASEAN. So in that sense, I think there may be some solutioning in that may be required. That's one part. The second part is also, I suppose we haven't touched on the pricing. Maybe I'll save that for kind of like a later part of this conversation. Yep.
If I may,
I was going to turn over to you, Alex, to answer that.
If I may jump in there, so the LEI has evolved dramatically from the beginning, so 10 years ago, because obviously it's a standard and it needs to evolve based on needs, right, and on use cases. So on the companies that are owned only by an individual and represented by an individual, such as sole proprietorship in Europe, for example, LEI can be assigned to that. So as long as there is a registration process, either in your case, for example, you were mentioning an individual being registered as a business, there is a registration process. So there is an opportunity to verify through an authoritative source of information that this is a business, even if it's only one person. So we could look definitely at how the LEI could be used in that context, and see whether it would match the requirements for an LEI. But I think what is important to mention here is that the LEI, as it is more and more used in more and more use cases, has evolved and will need to evolve further to ensure that it matches the various industries where it's used. And it's kind of a call for action. So if you need the LEI to evolve, or if there are discussions that needs to be taken place, we're always open to take them on board. And our objective as a non-for-profit is to make the system ubiquitous, used by everybody. Our motto is one LEI behind every business, and that's our ultimate mission.
Oh, fantastic. And it's actually interesting what you say, we go back to Aline when he described the problem, that many of those problems we can't measure in cost actually sits with the MSMEs and SMEs, that they don't report it. So it's not caught in the numbers, the frustration when the payments doesn't go through, or the frauds or the scams. So it's a good point, Selena. We'll come back to the commercials around it when we talk about uptake also. Interested to hear Australia, a very different scenario from Malaysia. Dima, again, the same questions that is the problem described as it resonates with you as well as the solution?
100%. So I would look even at the problem as sort of a larger space than just payments. I have had experience working with large organizations in Australia. Every organization that deals with other businesses has the problem to solve. How to identify the business entity that they're dealing with, how to verify businesses' information and their delegated representatives and roles and so on. So it is a problem that exists for every business, for every B2B interaction. It is at the moment with mixed level of success solved by local authorities. The only solution that we have at the moment is probably with Glyph to provide a global solution. And the way I look at the solution from my perspective, from a trust ecosystem perspective, there is Identifier. That's great. But there is also a certain company information associated with that identifier, which is important for people to get sort of guaranteed access to or verified access to. Then there is also a consistent set of interfaces to this, because at the moment, if I'm operating in Australia, I might be able to connect to a local business registry with their local identifiers and consume information one way. The moment I go global, I have that problem to solve in every market. So having consistent set of interfaces globally makes a massive difference for businesses, especially globally operating businesses. Glyph is a trust anchor or a network of trust anchors that provides that authoritative source of information. What's behind Glyph is also a consistent set of processes that have been used for verification of those businesses globally. So you can rely on that the business entity has been verified in one country the same way as it's been done in another country. So that consistency is extremely important. And yes, payments from a payments perspective, 100% it resonates, and it's important for both sides of transaction as well. So first, when the business is making a payment, the bank needs to verify that this person is in the right role, has the right authority to execute that payment. On the other side, where the money go to, we need to be able to verify that it goes to the right account associated with the right entity. So 100% the problem resonates, and I do see Glyph has been a significant part of the solution globally.
Does businesses ask you about LEI codes, Dima? Would somebody come in meetings and say, are you working with LEIs?
Not at the moment. I think we started asking that question. If the businesses that we interact with, at least from Connect ID perspective, we on purpose started asking that question and knowing that most of the time we will probably get no as an answer at this stage, unless we're dealing with the large organizations, with the global companies. I think we're trying to educate businesses around us if they do have that identifier that helps us as well.
Yep. Thank you. Aline, actually, do you want to add? I have a question also.
Yeah, just one thing, right? Because I'm very much with Dima here, right? I mean, it's a process that's going to take some time as well, right? The key question behind all of this is that when you pay somebody, or you pay, and that somebody could be a person or could be a company, of course, you need to have the certainty that you want to have the certainty that you're going to pay to the right person, the right company, right? And any sort of mechanism or data points that will help you to have that level of certainty you want to have is welcome, right? The key issue behind this statement that I'm making is that how can you have this sort of alignment across the board about what are those key data points that you need to validate and that will give you the certainty you're paying to the right person, right? Knowing, of course, that when it comes to cross-border payments, you have more than 200 countries in the world. You need to manage this kind of sort of alignment across all those countries. And what we see in our context is that's actually precisely the purpose of IP, right? Is to create this interoperability mechanism in between all those countries that some way actually are using some mechanisms that are similar, but that they're still different, right? I mean, it's 90% similar, but 10% not similar. And you need to making sure that for a given PSP, banks or non-banks, actually, it can be sure that the same kind of interoperability mechanism will be used.
Perfect, thank you. And yes, I had a question straight, and you can and that was, Aline, how do IPID and Glyph place together? Somebody else here, what's the difference? Is it competitors or are you complementary?
I really don't see ourselves as competitors, right? Actually, we are friends.
I wouldn't have them on this webinar if they were. That's the answer.
But actually, I see us actually as very much complementary, right? We are a technology provider, right? That's one thing. Glyph is much more about, I would say, a data provider, right? Or an identity provider, which is supported by, like Dima mentioned, right? With a very solid set of processes to validating the identity that you're giving to somebody, right? Which is the AI. We are just the technology behind that will make sure that those data points I was mentioning will be validated.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep. No,
so just to give you an example, so HiPay is part of our partner program. So we have a partner program with about 60 vendors and other service providers who are leveraging the LEI in their services and products. And we exchange on a regular basis to ensure that everybody is consistently informed about the progress of the LEI and also can contribute to the story of the LEI.
Yep. So first time when I came across LEIs was when I worked for then Refinitiv, I think it was, maybe Thomson Reuters. Like the name, I don't know when the name changed, and LEI comes up because those data providers are actually the issuers also, if I'm correct. So maybe let's go in a little bit to that commercial model that Aslina was alluding to, that it actually is a challenge when it's price and commercial impact. So Alex, do you want to speak about how it looks today, and then maybe Aslina can reflect on how that resonates with her customers?
Sure. So the way the LEIs are created or issued is leveraging a network of what we call LEI issuers who are accredited, so companies that we accredit as Glyph to issue LEIs on behalf of the global LEI system. So they need, of course, to fulfill a certain matter of operation and a technological readiness to be able to do that. They need to demonstrate that they're able to verify at national level the existence of the company, obviously, and extract the right necessary information to ensure that when a company asks for an LEI, they can ensure that they issue the LEI to the right, to a real company. And that work, of course, is at cost recovery basis level. So meaning that they can charge, but they cannot charge, they only charge up to their costs. So at the beginning of the LEI story, an LEI would cost between 250 to 300 euros. That was quite a lot. It was because it was the beginning, because you needed to grow the system. And now we more around, I would say, it's depending on the LEI issuer, because there's some competition between those. It can be between $50 and $100, let's say. So around that range, and it's going down. And the more LEIs, the less it will be costly, obviously, because the system becomes more scalable and therefore more accessible. We also have models, which is important, to ensure that for SMEs especially, that the price is actually zero. So we have a network of what we call validation agents, which are generally banks, but not only banks, who, when they onboard a customer with a corporate or as legal entities, we'll ask the question, do you have an LEI? If the answer is no, they will leverage their onboarding process to request an LEI for that company and generally sponsor the cost of that LEI. So as the LEI system has evolved over the last 10 years, it also has evolved in terms of business model, where, as I said, You have I go to get an LEI, I pay $50, I get it, and then I manage it myself. Validation agents managing the LEIs on behalf of their customers. But we also have business registries, for example, who are directly involved with the LEIs, who have a model of bulk issuance of LEIs. So every time they create an identity nationally, they would look at creating an LEI. So this will continue to evolve with the objective of, as Lina, making it cost effective for everybody, because we understand that it needs to be, especially in specific regions, it needs to be as cost effective for everybody. I would throw back the question, as we mentioned earlier, but what's the cost of a failed payment? What's the cost of a fraud? And it's always about value here, and not really money costs. And I think it's an important debate we need to have in this discussion.
I'm going to let Eslin and then Dima answer that.
Sure. Okay. So the thing is, let's take it into perspective. For Malaysia, normally, if you want to verify local payments, PayNet does provide the service. It's called the NAD registry lookup, right? So what will normally happen is that banks will kind of like do a lookup registry into our what you call proxy identification to identify whether or not a particular payment does belong to a particular beneficial owner, right? So that service is actually provided by us free of charge, right? So juxtapose that against we were to offer the services of LEI to the smaller businesses, the micro businesses, and these are businesses that typically would generate kind of like because things I see this more of a cross-border use case than anything else, right? So they would generate from a cross-border perspective transaction value of $1,000 equivalent below, right? So it's kind of like really low value transaction. Now I tend to take your point that in the sense that what is the cost of a failed transaction, right? So there is where we need to kind of like push the unit economics and the sense of making this kind of payments, this kind of verification and lookup to be something that is feasible for them to subscribe to. Then then it does make sense. But the thing is, to me, is relative from the point of view of those who are making 1 or 2 payments per month, and these are like really low value payments. The unit economics needs to kind of like speak to having an LEI as opposed to making frequent payments, and these are kind of like upwards of the smaller value, right? So which is why what you're hearing in terms of the use cases right now is more of a forex transaction, where it's kind of like sitting in the bigger banks, the mid-sized companies and the mid-sized operators, where there's actually a higher frequency of payment. So again, I tend to agree with you. It's a numbers game. The more it is, the more scalable and the more cost efficient it can be. So that's where the challenge lies, right? And there's always a chicken and egg issue around how do you price it right, and how do you encourage adoption when kind of like for Malaysia at least, we have upwards of 96% of businesses who are small businesses, right? Maybe I'll just stop there. Yeah.
Thank you. Alex, do you want to comment anything on that before we hear the Australian view?
No, and I mean, these are all fair statements. And by the way, we are active in Malaysia to identify who could be an ideal validation agent, for example, who are who would have a benefit in helping those MSMEs getting an LEI, especially for their cross-border activities. I understand that domestically this is not necessarily a requirement. So every collaboration is welcome. And by the way, we can discuss as Lina after this.
Sounds like a sales pitch.
Sounds like it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Very good. But so Dima, from the other view, from more from PayNet.
So we can live without identity, without consumer identity, without business identity. The problem with that is, in general, the burden, the cost is distributed. It's less visible. And that's probably the biggest problem for anything identity, any identity business cases. The cost is there, but it's less visible. As an organization, I deal with multiple banks to perform my business transactions. I deal with multiple business partners. At the moment, every of those business partners have their own verification, which costs money and costs time. If I can verify myself once and present myself to all my business relationship, if you look at if you step back, you see the cost, 10, 20, 30, 100 times more than you would do it otherwise. But I do agree, I think one of the suggestions I had, and Alex just mentioned it as well, that the biggest solution, from my perspective, the most cost-effective and the most trusted solution to the cost problem here is the source business registries issuing LAIs from the very beginning. So at the moment, we do rely on proxy verification when another business entity or government agency comes in and verifies something that's previously been issued. But if the source business registry in each country issue LAI and perform consistent set of processes to do that and expose it via consistent set of interfaces, this would be the ultimate solution. And this is where the government could subsidize potentially, it triggers a lot of positive effects in global economic interactions as well as local economic interactions. So there is a big benefit for the local economy and global economy. So the governments can actually do more. That's probably a call to action to the government and government registries to start looking at that, because then the efficiency will increase significantly.
Just to
and the cost will drop, yeah.
A bit of statistics there. So we have 38 LEI issuers globally who issues LEIs in every country in the world, so except North Korea, not on the side, because there's no LEI issuers that is able to verify information in that country. But otherwise, every country is covered. And in many countries, actually, the LEI issuers is the business registry. And obviously, that's a trend that we want to continue having, because it's, as we mentioned, the ideal LEI issuer. Not that the others are not doing a great job. They're actually doing an amazing job, especially cross-border jobs. We have LEI issuers who can issue LEIs everywhere in the world, which is quite impressive in terms of a operational and technological challenge. But yes, clearly, when you are the closest you are to the source of information, the better and the most qualitative it will be. But you would be surprised sometimes that some business registries are not as qualitative as you could think. And the LEIs sometimes provide more up-to-date information that the business registry itself does. So it's interesting to see that dynamic between information that a company can share directly through the LEI system, because as an LEI user, you own your data and you manage your data. So you can update it potentially more frequently than you would do with your national business registry. But nevertheless, I agree, there is a need for a strong collaboration with business registries. And that's what we're doing. I would like to illustrate that by a recent announcement we made actually yesterday with the UK business registry. We even link URL link LEIs with the national identity page of the business registry, where you are on the LEI website, you find a company, you have the information provided by the LEI, and then you can click on the national identity that is always recorded with the LEI, and you can be redirected directly to the page of the business registry where you will find more information, like, for example, about UBOs or where you can download documents if you need documents. So that collaboration will continue to increase, and point taken, it is the best approach. It's one of the best approaches, yes.
And I'm looking at it from a technical perspective. I would like to establish everywhere the cryptographic chain of trust.
Yes.
And this is where, going to the root source always helps. And it always gives me much higher level of assurance for any transaction. And it's probably long-term, it's not just about the basic business information, what LAI has linked right now, but also even consumers interact with businesses. They need to understand that the website that they're looking at belongs to the right business. So we need that assurance. We also need, in the payment space, we need to understand that this particular bank account with this bank account identifier belongs to this business and business identifier. That link is super important as well. So all of this information, I think, that's why I look at the end-to-end cryptographic chain of trust. This is why my preference always go directly back to the source.
If I may, I have to jump in there because this is the next evolution, as you know, of the LEI. I haven't mentioned that yet, but it's called a verifiable LEI, which is actually organizational identity and verifiable credential systems that not only enable the verifiability, the verification on digital platform of businesses. Am I dealing with the right company on the website, on a digital platform? But also, am I dealing with the right representative of that company? Because it's all companies don't sign contracts, companies don't do anything. It's people at companies that do things on behalf of the company, and you need some to be able to univocally identify those individuals as well. And that's exactly what the VLEI, which is a relatively new system, will be and is doing, is enabling authentication and permissioning of companies and their representative, and also enabling digital signatures at global level to ensure that an individual and a company and a role are clearly identified in every transaction cryptographically.
So if I can just chime in on those two points that both of you mentioned, I suppose I think one cannot deny the fact that, you know, a trust layer is actually something that you know, everybody kind of like holds very dear to, in the sense that it is a priority for us to know that, you know, you are who you are, right? And how do I know you are who you are? So one way is actually to trace back the cryptographic chain, but there are multiple ways. You can even look at something around tokenization, right? And where access and security and, you know, the trust protocols are actually established right from the start, then, you know, the verifiability becomes something that is kind of like a given, right? So there are many ways of looking at this, but I suppose the key to it is actually to really understand how do people connect, because as time goes by, I'm increasingly painfully aware that you know, there are some parts of the world that's still connecting on sockets, whereas other parts of the world are on APIs, and within APIs there's actually, you know, the API that's on JSON, and those that they are on different languages, you know. So these are the kind of things that you know, we need to kind of like expand the discussion and make it a little bit more jurisdiction specific, in the sense that, you know, for it to be relevant and for it to be usable in each one of our jurisdictions, it's got to speak to this kind of connectivity. Yeah, then you will achieve the ubiquity and the interoperability.
Consistent set of interfaces.
Yeah.
Excellent. Alain, turning to you to see if you want to comment in and chime in on this, being the technologist on the call here. How much do you work with that, the consistency, and do you see it as a challenge for uptake?
Big time. I mean, I actually very much echo what Azlina said, right? I mean, people, it's fascinating to see that when you attend some conferences, so you're speaking to conferences, you're reading articles, I mean, and you're reading stuff about tokenization, blockchain technology, APIs, and you very rapidly believe that this is actually very widespread technologies and used everywhere. And as soon as you're getting into that business, like we do, right, where we actually talking to some of the most prestigious financial institutions of the world and all that, you realize that, well, not really. Okay, there's still actually a lot to do when it comes to, for instance, API. API exists for a long, long time, right? I mean, just making sure that each and every financial or payments institutions would be API literate. It's a long-term challenge. It's a long-term challenge, not even talking about tokenization and all that. So to the point of Dima, I think having some kind of common set of interface is one thing, but also the way that all communication will happen is another thing, right? I mean, it's not that easy. I mean, Alex and I have seen this also during our days at Swift, right? I mean, I don't see really the problems to be domestic problems, right? By the way, I mean, I think when it comes to Malaysia, what Azlina does with her teams and all that, actually, you know, it's making everything right domestically. I mean, you're looking at many countries, domestic payments are actually very much efficient, and there's little level of frauds. It's mostly interactive, real time. You have a QA mechanism and all that exists already, right? It becomes certainly much more complex as soon as you're crossing the borders, right? I mean, as soon as you're getting from, as Lina was mentioning, ASEAN, Well, it remains an issue, right? If you look at Europe, even Europe which has been there for many years, you realize that there's still actually a lot of technological difference in between different countries and all that. That's why actually this new regulation popping up as well to try to aligning all of this, but it's not easy, right? And not easy at all.
Yeah, I have to do a plug for the API expert report that came out about API standards and harmonization. EPA was a part of it, but it's a really good toolkit with a checklist, and I'm looking forward to see what will be done under that G20 task project. I'm sure that Dan and my team can pop it in there. We actually have an audience question, so I'm going to read straight out as I do with the questions. So it's from Australia, this one. My question is, where do liabilities exist and extend for regulation and enforcement against LEI entities where a transaction is in dispute?
Is it for me?
I guess so.
Well, I mean, there is no, the LEI is identifying that the company exists. And if that company go wrong, it's still very interesting to be able to identify the company with its LEI. So LEI is not there to say, yes, no worry, you can do payments with that company. It's there to say, yes, you are effectively doing a payment to that company and not another one. So that's very important to mention. And in terms of the use of a LEI within company, it's like the name of the company. Every employee of a company can say, I'm working for, I don't know, I'm working for Glyph. And the LEI of Glyph is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there is no restrictions within about the usage of the LEI by anybody within a company, obviously, because it's just identifying that company. And that would be the answer to Mark on that front. Maybe he has something else behind this. There's something else behind this question, and happy to clarify further if needed.
And with that, I encourage everybody to pop your questions or comments into the chat as you want. Last little discussion we want to have is like, what can be done more? What can the industry do more? What can the Glyph Foundation do more? And I want to pop in there also, what can actually EPA do more to help? A few different examples has come up. I really like this one that actually you get prompt to apply for an LEI when you registered your company, but that's still not going to catch the majority of companies that's already in action. Or is it mandating we're looking for? So I'm going to go to Elaine first, just because you've seen mandating in Europe. How has that resonated with audience that they have to have pre-validation, and do you see more uptake and LEI discussions?
What you see, I mean, you might know, right? I mean that the European PSPs, right, in the payments world only, right, has been confronted with many new regulation over the last since the emergence of the euro currency. I mean, go back to the year 2000. There's been actually many new, regulations that come actually on the head of the financial institution, from SEPA to many other ones. And the reality is that financial institutions in Europe are confronted with a kind of tsunami of investment that they need to make to ultimately actually make all the flows, the financial flows, actually a lot more seamless, smooth than it used to be, and easy. They see this essentially also as a cost of business, right? Because at the same time, what you've seen is that the regulators, whilst imposing all those new obstacles, right, and changes, are also imposing that they should be for free. So inevitably, the banks and the other PSPs actually sees this actually as a cost of business, and therefore, they're struggling to allocating the right investment to make this actually to give this the right return as well. So that is actually a big challenge for all the PSPs in Europe is how can I cope with all of those regulatory changes, and how can I make it I can make something out of it as well, as far as me as a financial organization, right? And what we see when it comes to the latest regulation that I was talking about, the VOP, verification of payee, is that this came actually about like 6 months ago, right? And now the deadline for making all of this possible is actually coming in October. So it gives them basically 14, 15 months to be compliant to such a regulation. And you see actually that we're talking about 5,000 PSPs, banks and non-banks, to be impacted. Actually, very little of them actually really aware of the consequence of this and what they will have to do. That's why you have actually companies like ours and quite a few others actually that will serve as intermediaries and helping all the institutions to be compliant as quickly as possible. But I mean the last one.
Regulation is good for you, actually.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, regulation always creates actually niche for new companies, right? I mean that's
Exactly.
I mean that's the way it is. But ultimately, we are there also to make things easier for everybody, right? And eventually, ultimately, also cheaper for everybody. If everyone actually has to do the same thing but 5,000 times, it will cost ultimately for the industry a lot more than having eventually a few technology providers can do the job for everybody, right? That's the way we see it. The last point I want to say is that do not forget that when you look at a PSP of a relative size, it is made of hundreds of different systems that some way actually are all interconnected to each other, right? So, and in many cases, changing one thing, like eventually bringing the LEI into this, has multiple implications in the whole delivery chain of a given payments. And that is the issue, right? That is the issue when we say, well, implementing iBit eventually will cost you like, I don't know, 1,000. I'm giving that numbers, right? We know, for example, for very, very clearly that the cost internally for the PSP will be at the minimum 10 times because there's so many layers of the production chain of a payments that would be impacted.
Yeah, no. It's tricky, that one, to show the cost benefit of changing things and where the cost comes and for whom. So I think we touched on that a few times, the transparency on what the cost actually is and who it costs for. So Dima, coming to you, what would you like to see though? What could the industry, Glyph, EPA, AP Plus do?
Good question. I think the true value of business identity and global identifiers like LAI provided by Glyph comes from adoption. So we need to get to the point of the wider adoption, and we need to create a set of incentives, both mandating in some contexts, in some use cases, but also encouraging businesses to adopt LAI where it makes sense. So like from my perspective, I look at encouraging it within the trust ecosystems that I'm involved in. But also from the government perspective, I think some contexts would require mandating it, like it has been mandated for the global large businesses after GFC. So it's about creating a set of incentives and demonstrating the value.
Yeah, awareness. Maybe it should be a slogan. Do you have an LEI? Or the cost is, and we all post it. And all our friends. Eslina, what do you think?
Well, I think I'm kind of like in the same boat as Dima, right? In the sense that it's got to be a balance between making sense out of mandating versus making sense out of the business sense of doing that, right? And to my mind, it is true that in certain contexts where there's actually a very high risk of fraud and there's actually a lot at stake in terms of value, mandating does make sense, right? But for the lower value payments, I suppose one of the things is that we need to really put our heads together is actually to look at some kind of proportionate imposition of LEI so that it makes sense in their context. Because if you have a streamlined right across the board type of approach and you just say, I'm going to mandate you to do it, the experience in Malaysia has always been the ones that doesn't see economic sense will fall off the cliff, right? And you don't see those transactions anymore, right? So you need to be able to still keep them on the rail and yet find a feasible way for them to actually still continue, albeit in kind of like a more palatable environment. That is what I would see LEI moving.
Yeah. We had some more questions, but we actually ran out of time. Can you believe it? That hour went so quick. Alex, I'm going to give the last word to you to say, what would you like the audience to walk away with and do to increase awareness and uptake on LEIs?
So clearly, it's all about awareness because, as many mentioned in this call, and Dima mentioned that at the beginning, not everybody knows what an LEI is, and I think ultimately, if you don't know what something is, you're not going to implement it, right? So we need to start by continuing the awareness level, increase the awareness level about the LEI, and that's really a call for actions for everybody, anybody really who believes in the benefits of the LEI system to talk about it and promote it. We are only 65 people at Glyph. We're a non-for-profit foundation. We're not everywhere on the planet, so we need partners and supports to do that. That's the first call for action. The second one is collaboration. So we do have, for example, IPID on our vendor partner program to support the LEI adoption. I would love to talk to Azlina after this call to see how we could enable the LEI in a specific country through existing infrastructures like yours, Azlina. It's really about collaborations. Standards adoption always go through collaboration. It can't just be something that is only mandated. The value needs to be demonstrated, and that's something we're working on. It needs to evolve with requirements, new requirements, and that's what we're also working on, and new technology, and that's where the VLEI is all. That's what the VLEI is all about. Is how do the LEI can be leveraged for a trust, a root of trust for digital transactions. So get educated or learn about it, teach about it, and let's work together to implement it.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, at time, I'm going to squeeze one in from me also because I can, and I'm going to say I love use cases all the time. So maybe Alex and Dima as members and Neslina and like make a few different use cases of the different kind of corporates and say this is how it helped them or the banks or the issuers. I think that would be really useful because yeah, awareness is king in this place. So everybody's watching the video. Thank you for watching video. Everybody's been online. Fantastic. Thank you. It was the first webinar from EPA this year. Oh, I think it is on the 5th of February. We have the outlook of the year with our advisory board. So tune into that one. Otherwise, thank you very much from us today. Thank you.